Welcome to Nasdaq Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, global markets reporter at Nasdaq. Joining us for this segment, we have Brian Menell, CEO of TechMet, a company building world-class projects that produce, process, and recycle technology metals critical to electric vehicles, renewable energy systems, and energy storage. Brian, it's great to have you with us. Welcome to Trade Talks.
Thanks, Jill. Very nice to be here.
How are companies like TechMet helping the U.S. prepare for its increasing demand for technology metals such as lithium and copper?
We're at the beginning of a very dramatic supply-demand dislocation for these critical minerals that go into the electric vehicle supply chain and the energy transition as a whole. You know, as TechMet, we, as you mentioned, build and manage projects that produce or process or recycle these key metals and metal chemicals: lithium, cobalt, rare earth metals, nickel, few others. And we do it in alignment with US interests, given the fact that these supply pipelines are, at the present time, almost entirely dominated by Chinese interests.
And you talk about a whole of government approach to addressing the resource race, which presently afflicts the future of the EV industry in America, among other sectors. Can you expand on that approach?
Given the scale of the challenge at hand, and the scale of the challenge not only requires our industry to reinvent itself in terms of volumes, but in terms of ESG compliance and carbon footprint and independence from Chinese control, we do need government engagement, and we need government engagement on a scale and with a level of priority and urgency that has not been in any way evident to date. There's a lot of progress with respect to data and analysis and will and prioritization from the White House down, and that's a fantastic start and very, very encouraging. But to turn that into coherent and coordinated programs on the part of Department of Energy, Department of Defense, Department of State, and others to actually impact materially on the security of supply of critical minerals into US industry is something that needs to be accelerated radically.
How has the Russia-Ukraine conflict exacerbated the resource crisis?
It certainly served to focus attention on vulnerability of supply chains in general. And it has also served to focus attention on the urgent need for the acceleration of the energy transition to reduce dependence of economies such as the US and others to oil and gas pricing shocks, which obviously the Ukrainian situation has resulted in. So certainly it's accelerating everything that was apparent anyway with respect to what we have to do as an industry, what the United States has to do as a country, both at the industrial level and at the government level, in order to remedy the short supply and Chinese control over these materials.
The United States Development Finance Corporation invested $25 million behind a TechMet project, a first in history. Can you tell us about the significance of the investment?
It was significant, and as far as you say, it was the first time in history that a US government funding institution had taken a direct equity interest in a metals and mining company. So we are, as TechMet, we remain the only metals and mining company in history to have direct US government funding agency equity. And it was significant in the sense that it does illustrate the growing prioritization of this supply-demand dislocation for what we call technology metals in the eyes of the US government, and the willingness to use different tools and different institutions in order to engage in our space. So while the transaction itself was not a big transaction, it was very symbolic and obviously very, very valuable for TechMet in terms of credentializing and de-risking perceptions of the types of businesses we're building in order to access other sources of funding on a larger and larger scale as we continue to expand our projects.
And finally, Brian, where do you envision TechMet expanding in the future?
We're engaging in a range of projects in the United States: direct lithium extraction from geothermal brines in California, recycling technologies. We've been a primary funder and remain a big shareholder of Li-Cycle, which is the foremost lithium-ion battery recycling company in North America, and now listed on the New York Stock Exchange as of 7 months ago, which has a a very, very exciting future in a part of our industry which will become bigger and bigger and bigger and more important, over the coming years. We are busy expanding our nickel and cobalt production in Brazil. We're busy expanding our tin and tungsten mines in Rwanda. We're busy building lithium production capacity in Cornwall in the United Kingdom. So we will continue to scale our projects and expand our portfolio in an ESG compliant, low carbon footprint way to balance China's, or to do our part in balancing China's control of these critical metal supply chains, feeding into US industry, and doing it in a kind of responsible and sustainable way.
All right, Brian, we appreciate the insight. Thanks for joining us on Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.